What is up, Rad Potential YouTube? I'm Mr. Rad, and this is my 1993 RX-7 with an RX-8 engine, a giant turbo, RX-8 front end, and RX-8 subframe, because we're building the cheapest FD RX-7 on the planet. And in today's video, I'm going to be taking some Amazon special, super high quality stainless steel. This is 4-inch, by the way. And we're going to be making a downpipe, because we need a bigger downpipe for the big turbo, in addition to recirculating the wastegate and hard piping all of my radiator hoses, or at least the ones that are really near all the hot and craziness of the turbo. So let's get to fabricating, and most importantly, get to living a life we don't need a vacation from. So bringing you guys up to speed on the FD RX-8. My knockoff BorgWarner S369 VS Racing Giant Turbo has ruined my old downpipe, which I made for a 3-inch V-band. It's all over here cut up into a bunch of different pieces because we're going to reuse some of it. With this turbo location, it complicates a few things. So in the last video on the car, we built this super sexy tube front end to fit the FD RX-7 bumpers, fenders, and ultimately bring my FD to be the most superior FD on the planet, because I have better panel gaps than most other FDs on the planet. Fenders, hood, it's dialed. Go check out that video. In that video, we also mounted our radiator and intercooler. Maybe that was the video before. Either way, my turbo complicates connecting this radiator hose, the top of the radiator, to this, which is the factory Renesis engine, thermostat housing, and whole water pump situation. So I went ahead and cut up a regular old stock RX-8 radiator hose here. So you can see this is just the end of it, right? And I'm gonna use that like a coupler, so we're on a budget. And I need to effectively bring this all the way around all the hot crazy death right here of melted rubber and, you know, horsepower. We need to connect those two. So in essence of keeping everything on this build super budget, and also serviceability, sustainability, replacement parts, like when this thing eventually melts down at a track, we gotta be able to fix it at the track. So using a stock rubber RX-8 upper radiator hose, plus some simple 1.5-inch aluminum from Amazon. I think these are like $9 for each different piece. It's just straight up 1.5-inch aluminum. Super, you know, basic stuff. So I think we're gonna take this 90-degree, lay that in here. It should connect to this top. We'll go straight and then turn right like this and go straight into that. This frame rail makes this a little hard. I can't really like 90-degree down and try to go under the turbo. I'd rather stay here where I can see it, so when it does, if it does melt, I have a good visual on it. If it's under the frame rail and it melts, then it's just like out of sight, out of mind, right? So we're gonna turn this into a sexy pipe that fits right there. With the power of movie magic, I already have one made. So this is just pieces of that taped together, a 90 kind of cut into a 45. You can literally see the shape of this tube right here.
Tubes.
Slides right in here, right into the front radiator hose, and we'll use our coupler at the back. So I haven't finish welded this yet, because y'all know, right? I am not a TIG welder. That was lovely. I guess the only unfortunate thing about wearing a button-down Hawaiian shirt sometimes is that my breathability, the breathability of my shirt catches on assorted sharp objects when you're working on your car. It's unfortunate. Maybe I ought to tuck those in from now on. So let's fix this. So where was I? I am not a welder, in a sense of that you want me to weld something that you're gonna see that's like a variance of just straight up mild steel. I have a MIG welder, it works great, I can make things stick together. With this tube being in the sexy part of the engine bay, right? Everyone at a car show is gonna walk up right here, they're gonna be like, no way, look at that FD with the giant turbo, and then they're gonna get closer and be like, oh my gosh, the unreliable Renesis engine, whenever this is gonna be, you know, properly set up, pretty reliable. It's got RX-7 apex seals in it, but this tube is front and center. It has to look sexy. So my TIG welder buddy, long story short, is gonna come in here and TIG weld this stuff, so that way it looks nice, in addition to TIG weld the downpipe. So with this piece laying right here, looking all nice, right? Just a simple clamp, 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 clamp. We now have our next problem, which is the proximity of this outlet to that. In hindsight, I could have put the turbo a little higher. Where that hurts me though is like the intercooler side. Okay, so there's always sacrifices in every situation. For me, the sacrifice is downpipe very close to heater line. Somehow This 4-inch pipe somehow has to fit like that. So let's get started making a downpipe. So I could have went ahead and had this turbo machined for a 3-inch V-band on the back of it. Right, if you've ever used Borg Warner turbos, why isn't this fitting? This was literally just on here. Come on. Okay. There we go. All right. Borg Warner turbos have like a Marmon. It's an interesting style of V-band flange where it's kind of conical. It actually is probably a much better sealing V-band than some of the like indexed ones or just your standard flat surface V-band. But this is like a 3.5-inch outlet on the turbo, and it necks up to 4-inch right here, so it gets massive. Which is cool, right? Like, I'm all here for it, more horsepower, but it's also a massive tubes, right where I need to run a nice small tube. So tubes, we have barely any clearance, but I do have a downpipe, or I guess an up pipe. So there's really no air gap in there, which is real unfortunate. But with this being 4-inch, I can put a creative dent in this downpipe and probably not restrict the flow at all. We might have a little bit of extra turbulence, but the wastegate is going to induce a ton of turbulence into this vicinity. So let me show you what I got going. Downpipe up, looking sexy. We neck this down to 3-inch right here. Okay, we're going down to 3, which is the size of the downpipe before, because it fits down in this hole. We can go that way. Tons of room. Clearing the frame. We'll go down there, we'll kick it back, we'll go out under the car. The reason to keep the 4-inch, in addition to just this flange being a 4-inch, is the wastegate. So I want to recirculate my wastegate. So this wastegate is going to go probably here-ish. Alright? Now I saw some comments in one of the videos, like, why do you talk about the ability to change your springs? Okay, like putting a wastegate in a location where I can always reach the top. You're always going to take the wastegate out to change the springs anyways. That is true. But it is way easier to get the wastegate out if it's just in a better position. In addition, having your wastegate vacuum lines, or I guess the reference lines from the boost controller and everything, look at how little things up here are hot and are going to melt my wastegate lines. In addition to, I can put my boost controller somewhere up here and not melt any of the wiring in any of the lines, which would then hold the wastegate closed, which would then cause an excessive amount of boost, which would make me go yeehaw, but then my apex seals would go flying through my turbo, ruin the turbo, and I'd have a bad day. So keeping the wastegate in a place where the heat management for your wastegate lines is just easy seems logical to me. So that's why I'm putting it up here. So the wastegate's gonna go about right here, which honestly, I could probably just go ahead and tack it in there before I even talk to you why I put the 4-inch on there. I really just like that spot. I should have just had my welder handy, but I break cameras with welders. So I'm gonna weld this real quick and then we'll be right back. And for once, my welding sparks didn't ruin the lens of the camera. So with the wastegate in this area, the recirculation for it is going to not really get complicated, but it's gonna happen very close to the top of the turbo. So I'm thinking to bring the wastegate recirculation up right here and then merge in very close in this 4-inch section. Honestly, it'll probably look cooler to kind of come up and then go like over and have like, you know, this really sweet looking, I don't know. It's gonna be front and center in the engine bay. And the reason to keep the 4-inch specifically with that wastegate merge location is that the velocity inside the pipe is going to be very slow right out of the back of the turbo. It's not going to have like collected and spiraled. You know, we see how like turbulent, like a tornado of velocity, and then it can spiral tighter and the velocity goes up. So if I'm mixing my wastegate, which is like, you know, imagine spraying a fire hose, the big 4-inch flamethrower out of the turbo, and now you're going to spray a smaller fire hose into it at an angle, the flows are gonna get disrupted. So I wanna give space, like a nice big expansion chamber, for my recirculated wastegate to not really impede the flow of the downpipe as a whole, if that makes sense. At least it makes sense to me. It's probably unnecessary. The thing is, once you start having big turbos like this, the wastegate, yes, it is important, but once you start making a lot of horsepower, you're generally holding the wastegate closed more than you need the wastegate open to manage boost, if that makes sense. So like if I'm gonna run this on E85 and we're gonna run 20 to 25 pounds of boost, right, or 20 pounds of boost, I don't need the wastegate to open as much or to have as much flow, right, to bypass the turbo, as if I were gonna try to run this on, like, let's say pump gas at 12 pounds of boost. Then my wastegate is gonna need to dump a lot more energy because the engine isn't consuming the energy, right? So we might see, like, you know, some sort of a wastegate recirc has a bigger impact on X horsepower, but then past that, your flow, just max flow doesn't really matter. But either way, this is gonna look sick, having these kind of paralleled tubes in here. I probably ought to put my alternator bracket on just so I make sure I don't hit that area. But everything is gonna be very hot in this area, definitely. There's just no question around it. So we're gonna have to probably wrap that and make some sort of a heat shield to lay on the side of the engine so we're not like cooking alternators, and definitely have to figure out a heat shield for this line right here with a dent. We wrap this whole thing, you know, right here, especially literally right next to the hot side. And then, you know, heck, this whole thing's probably gonna have to get exhaust wrapped. It's just the funny part about rotary boost managing temperature is that I'm gonna wrap all that to try to keep the heat out of the intake, right? Like this is your REW engine with the intake manifold and stuff. Usually your turbo's here. All the heat is right in here by the intake manifold. You typically measure your intake air temperature up here in the upper intake, but your intake air temperature down here right by the engine, which is like where you're consuming it, is excessively hotter. And there's really no sensor I could use to measure that, but trying to mitigate or keep all the heat away from my lower intake manifold is one of my goals on this, which is why the downpipe being up high, the 3-inch going down through here, keeping it away. You know, I want to be able to beat on it and not have detonation, and managing heat is one of those. Doesn't that thing look cool? It's just ready for like a buzz level, you know, hood exit, but hood exit would be such a pain in the butt. Dang guys, I am super stoked with how this is looking. It's coming out just how I dreamed it up. Look at that. Not quite symmetrical. And there's definitely, like, you know, there's a hole right here. Alright, so this could have been tighter, you know, bend to make it more tight and then look super sexy TIG welder guy, which I am not. But look at that. It should clear the hood just fine. Nice and tight gap here on the downpipe. And again, I want all this stuff TIG welded so it looks nice. Maybe for the first few times that we're running it, like doing some testing, maybe take it to a local Cars and Coffee, flex all my fab work. We don't heat wrap it, and then after the, you know, we're gonna rip this thing, so it's gotta be heat wrapped, otherwise my plastic intake manifold's gonna melt, which I really don't wanna do. And probably my alternator and this upper radiator line, which is just so precariously located right there. I haven't added my creative dent yet, because with this on here, the index or the like rotation of the V-band is pretty much locked in right now. There's a little bit of flex in here, you know, the bellow, okay, and then there will be another bellow down there under the car. There was just no way I was gonna fit a straight bellow up here, because those things are pretty much straight. You're like locked in to 4 inches or so, you know, of bellow. Like you're stuck with this. I can't make a bend in this, and I don't really want to bend this, right? Because this is just to help take some of that vibration when the engine moves and the exhaust is mounted and lets everything flex. But Dang, this is looking like a proper science experiment right here, guys. Look at all the tubes.
Tubes.
Tubes. Tubes. Tubes. Tubes. I love it. Oh, that looks so nice. Now I just need like a trick little gusset right here, like a little piece of stainless webbed in there with like the RP cut out of it on my plasma table. That would be rad. So I need to make little tabs for this radiator line as well. See, I've got these really nice threaded inserts on my RX8 frame rail. I want to hard mount this heater line to the frame so it doesn't move. You know, it's not sitting in here flopping around. Dang, that looks sick. All right, well, let's weld some more. This joint right here is not tacked, it's just taped. So I need to put a tack on that because I'm gonna start adding some weight down here. And let's get the next piece of the downpipe on and see if we can't get this to go down under the car. I really don't know where the next V-band is gonna go, but in my head, I'm thinking probably down in that big, nice open space right in here behind the wheel. You know, about maybe 6 inches below this or 8 inches below this. Where the turbo is, in order to remove this, I'm gonna have to lift it clean, like just straight vertically up. So even the wastegate, it's just, you know, vertical will bring it off. So down there, if I were to take the downpipe under the floor and then back and then put the V-band where you typically put a, you know, V-band for a downpipe, I think it gets a little complicated, so I may put the V-band a little further up. I guess you would disconnect the mid-pipe first and then you could snake it out of there. I don't know. It just has to be removable and be removable quickly. But for now, science project achieved. We're just gonna need some piece of sheet metal or something to kind of lay in right there by the alternator maybe. I don't know, man, that just looks so real now with a downpipe and wastegate recirc. It's like we're ready to make this thing run. Alrighty. And just like that, the new downpipe, the new wastegate recirculation, and the official end of the downpipe, there's a 3-inch V-band down there in the bottom, ready for the rest of the exhaust, is complete. And I'm stoked. I also went in here, and that's why I had this whole apparatus off, and there's now a brace that goes to the alternator bracket right here, this bright yellow bolt, to the T4 flange over there. And what that's gonna do is just help to stabilize the turbo. This is a pretty big turbo, and I made this manifold out of cheap, like pretty thin stainless. So it does, you know, I'm gonna wiggle this and you can see it's on rubber engine mounts as well, but just see how much everything kind of moves. So with the brace, that's gonna help sturdy this up. Once the intercooler pipes, you know, everything's in here tight, this thing really isn't gonna go anywhere. But it's hard to, you know, I don't wanna mount the turbo to the chassis because I'm not going to run solid engine mounts. So we might switch to those in the future, at which time I can then mount the turbo to the chassis. If I do that now, then it's definitely going to crack because the engine's going to move and the turbo is going to stay locked down, right? So things to think about when you're building your turbo kit. But in my case, that little piece of steel holding the T4 flange should be, it's definitely helpful. It's definitely not hurtful. So I haven't put my creative dent in the bottom of my downpipe yet because I was going to, and then with all this stuff just tacked together, I didn't want to like start hammering on it on my workbench and it fall apart. So we're still touching my coolant line right here, but I have it marked, and I also marked a spot right here for the O2 sensor bung, so it'll point that way towards the engine where our wiring harness comes out down there, so it should be easy wiring. Super clean. Ideally, nothing will really exist over here except for, you know, the turbo, water line, and then I think, I say nothing. The last thing that will exist over here, I'm gonna modify this FD AST, so air separation tank elimination thing, or I guess this is an air separation tank. I'm gonna cut a couple of these fittings off and I'm gonna weld a new one on the side, and this is gonna sit here, something like that, where this line right here that you see existing on it, plus another one right under it, is gonna go, I got caught on my shirt and my pants in this video. Right here will be the heater line, feed to this, because that line right there, the one that goes straight, is actually the one that goes to that plastic tank on an RX8, which we won't have anymore. But they connect to the same spot, so we're going to use this one. That obviously lower radiator hose. And then up at the top of this, right above the thermostat, you can see it here. That port needs to go also to the air separation tank, because that's on a factory RX8, which I think, yeah, that tank's out of that one. I don't have a tank handy, but on a factory RX8, those two ports would go to that plastic tank up here. So we want to make sure that we can emulate, or at least keep the Renesis engine coolant system working as intended from the factory. So we're just gonna use this instead. And then same thing, standard radiator cap. I'll run a line from here to an overflow tank, and they'll probably, the coolant overflow and this will probably exist somewhere in this vicinity. And then I've got to make some sort of a sheet metal cover for here to keep the dirt out. And then that sheet metal cover will have some sort of an inner fender to protect my air filter, which is going right here if you didn't see that. And then over here, there basically will be just headlights and nothing. And I'll probably put my catch can somewhere over here. And then I've got to sort out a remote air, and I've got to sort out a remote oil filter and oil cooler lines and all sorts of stuff, which has started showing up. So get fired up for some progress on the FD, but I have to give a huge thanks to RX7parts.com right here for hooking me up with taillight harnesses. I'm super pumped. Kevin over there, awesome dude, got me some taillight harnesses because I do need those. I was gonna try to make some myself, like buy the little housings and wire them up. In addition, probably the hardest to find part for my whole entire car, not even this hatch, which I got for free, and it's, you know, it fits like a glove. It fits perfect, but check this out. I now have hatch hinges, and they're even red. So a bunch of stuff to figure out on the back of the car, but I want to give Kevin at RX7 Parts a huge shout out for hooking me up with that stuff. You know, FDRX7 parts are super expensive. He has a ton of FDRX7 parts, so go check out his website. Very, very fair prices. Everything that's on the website would be stuff he has available. And I'm super stoked to have him help out on the car. I've been seeing him at Deals Gap the past few years, and I love working with great people in the RX7 community. So Kevin is definitely one of those guys. So RX7parts.com, go over there and just look at what he's got for sale. You don't have to buy anything, just go check out the website, it'll be sweet. So on the back of the car, the last few bits that you'll see in the next fabrication video for the back of this is what I'm working on after this, is that fuel cell needs to go back here, and this hatch needs to be modified in some way to fit. I've got taillights now, the taillight harnesses, which are cool, so I can set this up. And lastly, super lastly on the things I need, if you have an FDRX7 rear bumper, any bumper, it can be cracked in half, I can glue it together, I don't care. I just need a bumper for the back of this. Let me know, drop in the comments, hit me up on Instagram. I really need an FD bumper, and they're kind of hard to find. Not really like the crash support, obviously, I got that, but the bumper cover, because like, we can't be rolling around with, you know, our pants hanging down, no bumper. So, with that, that's the end of today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm excited for the turbo kit to be mostly done, and a lot of little fabrication work and all that stuff to come. But with that, like I said at the beginning, live a life you don't need a vacation from, keep it rad, and we'll see y'all in the next one. Alright guys, so my candid end of the video, dog sleeping, it's hot outside, it's summer, is the next big thing that's happening right now is waiting to stack some parts for this right now. And I have had all the parts stacked for this. So because we're at a good break on this one, the REW Swap RX8 should be running very quickly now that we have some Tuned by Sean help. Go check out Tuned by Sean's website as well. Here at the end, I got all my lists. I just got to start installing stuff. Peace, guys. Oh, and rims.